You know, anger is a very complex emotion. The story is told of a little girl working on an English project for school. She came to her father and she said, "Dad, I need to know the difference between anger and exasperation." Her father said, "Let me demonstrate the difference." Picked up the phone, he called a random number in the phone book. The man picked up the phone. The father said, "Is Melvin there?" The man said, "There's no one here by that name." And he hung up the phone. The father called the same number a second later, and the man picked up the phone and the father said, "Is Melvin there?" The man said, "You just called this number. I told you there was no one here by that name. Stop calling this number," and he slammed down the phone. The father turned to his daughter and said, "That was anger. Now let me demonstrate exasperation." And he called the same number back and said, "This is Melvin. Have there been any calls for me?" As I said, anger is a very complicated and nuanced emotion, but every mature adult must learn how to manage their anger. Sigmund Freud based his view of anger management on the popular scientific theory of the day. It was called hydraulic theory, and the basic premise was that tension or pressure in any part of a given system would need to be released or would simply move to another part of the system. Freud saw human emotions in that way. He reasoned that if we don't vent anger, it will move to another part of the emotional system and cause problems. And so he recommended this process of venting. And various other professionals took that a step further and developed various modalities such as anger work, where individuals will punch pillows and throw things in order to vent their anger. There was even at one point the belief that families should engage in what was called the Vesuvius hour. And during the Vesuvius hour, which they would have at a particular time of the evening, they would shout at one another and throw things and scream and vent all their emotions, after which it was thought they would calm down and have a wonderful evening. Well, it didn't quite turn out that way, because eventually we realized that when people express anger, it actually deepens the feelings of anger. The more you express those feelings of anger, the deeper the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral hold that anger has upon an individual. Probably the reason that anger work really was effective for some people was because it was exercise. There was a lot of physical activity involved. So any good anger management program will have that component. It will have the component of physical exercise, because the reality is that stress causes stress hormones to build up in the body, and really the only way they can be metabolized is through physical exercise. Another important component of any good anger management program is learning how to control our thought life, because our emotions are largely the result of the way we think about things. And so sometimes we have to work hard to revise the way we look at things. For instance, a person might think, "Everyone should always treat me well." And that creates within them an unrealistic expectation. And because they don't get what they expect, they end up angry. Now, for me, the distorted thought was that I should control other people's treatment of me. I thought that I was responsible for making them treat me well. And when they didn't treat me well, I would become extremely frustrated, and rather than accept the situation, I would become angry. In fact, let me tell you a story from my own family. My husband is a quiet man, and I tend to be a little more explosive by nature. And so we were having an argument, and unfortunately we were having this argument in front of the children. And the louder I got, the quieter my husband got. Well, afterward, I went to my daughter, and I wanted to apologize. But before I could get one word out of my mouth, she said, "Daddy had a short temper." And I couldn't understand why she was mentioning his short temper. And then she said, "And you had a long temper." I eventually learned that I was not responsible for pressuring my husband to treat me well. And when I began to understand that I was not responsible for his behavior, I could simply walk away when I was frustrated and revisit the situation later. And my anger problem was largely solved. Carrying anger with us day by day, hour by hour even, can be very harmful. A study that was done out of Boston University said that hostility levels are a better predictor of heart disease than traditional factors such as high cholesterol, high blood pressure, smoking, obesity. Another study out of Nova Scotia said that there was a difference between what they called constructive anger and destructive anger. They found that destructive anger had these harmful health effects, but constructive anger did not. This is fully in line with what the scriptures teach when they say, "Be angry, but sin not." Probably the most significant damage that we do through anger is to our relationships. The story is told of a father whose son had a difficult time controlling his temper. The father said to his son, "Next time you feel angry, take hammer and nails out to the fence and pound nails into the fence until you calm down." Well, the little boy did that, and the first day he pounded 37 nails into the fence. Day by day, however, he pounded fewer nails in, until finally he didn't need to pound any nails at all. He had learned how to control his temper. But the father took him out to the fence and said, "Look at the fence, son. The fence will never be the same." Such it is with relationships. When we lose our temper, sometimes the relationship is never the same. Escalation is the deadly relationship sin we're talking about here, where we lose control of our temper and get in an argument that either causes people to throw verbal attacks at one another or sometimes even physical attacks. Escalation tends to feed off of reactive cycles. Reactive cycles occur when, in a relationship between two people, one engages in a certain behavior toward the other, and the other engages in a behavior in reaction to that behavior. Then the first individual responds in reaction to the second individual, and then there's another reaction, and then another reaction, and we get to the place where we don't know where that person ends and we begin. Reactive cycles are so powerful that they're very, very difficult to break. It's really only a miracle that can break them sometimes. The way out of a reactive cycle is up. The way out is up. I send up a prayer to God when I know I'm in the middle of a dangerous situation where I may react. Instead of responding conscientiously, I may react emotionally. I recommend that people shoot up a prayer to heaven and ask God to give them wisdom as to how to interact with the person with whom they're tempted to react in a non-productive, destructive way. The healthiest marriages are not the ones in which the individuals never argue. The healthiest marriages are the ones where the individuals know when to back out of an argument. And that's why the replacement behavior for escalation is time out, what we call time out, learning how to back out of a potentially escalative situation. What I recommend to married couples, for instance, but this applies to any kind of relationship, is that they agree ahead of time that at any time when they feel themselves escalating, they can call time out and the other person is obligated to agree to that time out. Then right then and there, when they call the time out, they schedule a time in the future so that nobody feels like this situation is going to get shut down and never addressed. They schedule a time in the future when, in calmness, once they've calmed down and regained possession of themselves, they will address the problem and solve it together in a non-escalated state. So next time you feel like escalating, take a time out. You'll thank yourself.